Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to this instalment of What Does the Future Sound Like? And we're really lucky this afternoon to be talking to Anna Lowenstein, um, klezmer violinist, composer, music maker, young person's facilitator, um, woman of all trades. So we're really lucky to have you with us. I thought we might just start by, for people that don't know your work very well, Anna, would you like to just talk about what had been happening for you over the past year in terms of your music projects?
Mhm. Hi. Yeah, it's really great to be here. Thanks for having me. So, yeah, the last year. Uh, at the very beginning of 2020, I was in rehearsal for a theatre show at the Menier Chocolate Factory, which I was invited to kind of be part of by Merlin Shepherd, the legendary klezmer clarinetist. He was MDing the show, and we managed 6 weeks of rehearsal and two previews, and then the theatre had to shut because of you know what. So that was a big, exciting project and a slight disappointment. But I think the theatre really determined to have us on at some point, so the run will happen. We just don't know when.
What's the show called for our audiences to look out for?
No, it was called Indecent, and it was a show by Paula Vogel. Paula Vogel, and it was it was going to be the European debut, and it was about it was kind of a show about a show, about a play that was written in 1906 by Sholem Asch. He was a Yiddish playwright and writer, and this play was about a relationship between the daughter of a brothel owner and one of the prostitutes, and it featured this like love relationship between these two women, and it toured around Europe, and then it went to the States and was on the Yiddish stage. This is the true story bit. It was on the Yiddish stage, got translated into English, and then like ended up on Broadway. And then once it was on Broadway, the whole production got shut down, and the cast and I think some of the production crew as well were arrested and charged with indecency. Wow. Because of this relationship, and it featured like the first kiss between two women that had ever been on Broadway. So it was it was a radical piece of work at the time. And so the show Indecent sort of follows the story of that show, both kind of from Sholem Asch writing it, all the way through to sort of 1920s America when the play moved over and what happened when it got there. And it was an incredible piece of work, and the music was also like a real joy to learn. It was scored and written by Lisa Gutkin, who's an amazing klezmer fiddle player from the States. She plays in the Klezmatics now, and we got to work with her a little bit. She came over for some of the last bits of rehearsal, and it was an amazing experience to be part of.
It sounds great. I need to keep that on my list of things to watch out for.
Yeah, it was great. And so it was a three-piece band. It was just me, Merlin, and an accordionist called Josh Middleton, Don Kipper, and we were like in costume on stage as part of the cast the whole way through. So it was a lot of music, and we were off book, so it was like a lot of music to learn, and also like knowing where to stand in the right time, in the right place, and pick up this thing and move over there, and
So when I was thinking about speaking to you, Anna, I was really kind of inspired about reading about the project. Is it a solo project that you're doing called Fertil Shtetl? And if I got it right, it's inspired by the fact that you lived above a Jewish shoe shop or a shoemaker's shop in South Hill. And that had so many resonances for the collection at the museum. And it made me think of a man called Nathan Seberg, he was born in Riga, and he was conscripted into the Russian army, which is a very common story for the Jewish population at that time, so late 19th century. He became a saddler in the Russian army. And then he manages to escape, basically, and come to Wales. he spends quite a few years in Wales as a peddler cycling. So he was the cycling peddler that went all around Wales selling. So I'm not quite sure what it was that he sold off of his bike. But then somehow he ends up in Manchester during the First World War, and he becomes a shoemaker in Manchester and becomes part of this community of kind of artisan makers. There were lots of small factories and workshops in the area that's around the museum, and he works from a workshop that was a converted garden shed in a house that he ended up with. But I just wanted to show you these. I found these in the archive. Let me see some fantastic. These are. Oh, can you see that? These are the leather gaiters that he wore or belonged to him when he was in the Russian army, and they're kind of quite pristine. I'm not sure that he wore them that much necessarily. Maybe he made them.
They must have meant a lot to him if he brought them.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing I found, which I found really quite moving, is that we've also got his top hat from when he got married. So he was in Manchester at this time. This is me holding a top hat.
It looks really small.
It does, doesn't it? The perspective's got a bit strange. But again, it's like super pristine. And maybe he only wore it once for his wedding. So I wonder if he was really a keeper of things. But we've got a few different objects related to his shoemaking. And we've got like a sort of a whole collection of his things. I think he was a bit of a magpie and kept things. It just sort of kind of spoke to me that your project also, there's this kind of interweaving link, historical link between all of these kind of these migrants, these makers, these shoppers, the traders that are all coming into the UK at that time. And I don't know, I think sometimes you forget there's lots of connections between what's happening in London and what's happening in Manchester. Slightly different scene, I suppose. But yeah, so I was a bit intrigued about how you were so inspired by this Jewish shoe shop. What was it like? And
well, it wasn't so much the shoe shop in particular. In fact, I don't think I actually ever went in there.
Really? Okay.
I think it's very much catered towards the Hasidic fashion, which I'm not sure I could quite pull off. Or want to pull off, I don't know. But it was one shop within a kind of a strip. It's a kind of parade of shops, and they're all ultra-Orthodox or Hasidic owned businesses. Apart from a few, there's a newsagent's and a post office and a pharmacy, which aren't owned or run by Orthodox Jews, but the rest of them are. And I used to practice like looking out onto this strip of shops. I've noticed, if you can see here, my little studio looks out onto my street. So like I always like to work looking out into the world. And I think it was a point in my life that I was just like doing a lot of work on learning klezmer and getting really deep into the tradition. And I used to just watch the world going by and see the kind of cycle of the week and the year go through. And I think I was just cycling home one day and thought, I just like had this kind of cute idea, I guess, that I'd write a tune for each of the shops. And then as I was cycling up to the shops, I was like, oh, they all alliterate with klezmer dances. And I kind of like alliteration. So that's kind of, I don't know, it started as this kind of cute idea, basically, and kind of thought nothing much more of it. Like wrote some tunes, they all kind of, like 3 or 4 tunes just sort of came out quite quickly. And since then, the project and the concept has kind of evolved in my mind, but the actual music is taking a lot longer. It's kind of slightly been sitting on my back burner, but what I've kind of become interested in, partly through other work and projects I do, is that I think I realised I'm slightly obsessed with sort of storytelling, and particularly the storytelling of like the kind of everyday and the kind of almost like the banalities of life in a way, and like what makes a story sort of thing. And so I kind of started to think about the ways in which I was relating to the area and how that had shifted while I was living there, because I was living in this flat which was also like 2 minutes away from where my parents lived and where I grew up, and kind of noticed my perception of the Orthodox community slightly shifting, and then started to think about kind of the interesting tensions that are at play, I guess, within this project, and that like the tensions between like me identifying as a Jewish person and potentially not being viewed by the community that I'm writing about as a Jewish person. Also like writing this collection of klezmer music, which isn't necessarily a music that the community particularly engage with. In fact, like recently I went into the like Judaica shop that's on this strip, and I was looking at all the CDs, and it was kind of, you know, the most up to, you know, like the latest hip boy star sort of singing, I don't know, like prayers and nigunim maybe, but and I asked the shopkeeper, I was like, oh, do you ever stock klezmer music? And he was like, what's that? So it's an interesting tension there, I think, and I'm not entirely sure how that will come through in terms of the music, but I'm kind of imagining that once I finish the project, I'm going to write up some of the stories that I want to tell and have it as a kind of blog or a website, and that will kind of accompany the music.
You could always go back into those shops now, not now, but after lockdown, and with some specific questions, almost be a bit of a kind of anthropologist, and try and tease some things out, because the thing is about klezmer, from my understanding of it, is the way that we know it is through the secular route, and it's through musicians mostly with that heritage getting to know it. But when you come from a tradition like the Hasidic, kind of in the Hasidic world, where those are living practices, their relationship to the music is completely different, because it's all ritualized. It's not something you play in like a sit down concert where people pay money to come and like hear some musicians. It's like all the music comes with the ritual, so they might think of it as like, oh, that tune, well, we do that tune on Friday night, or we do that tune on Shavuot or Shavuos, or do you know what I mean? Like, so the idea of calling it klezmer, I mean, that's a new thing, isn't it? We don't, so they probably would just call it music, or their music, and there's definitely that it seems very alive there to me, but not in the way it's been constructed in our world. It's like so the two worlds living alongside each other, aren't they, really?
While lockdown had slightly eased, I had started doing that, and I went, and so there's a grocer's called Getters, and the owner of that shop is super lovely, warm man, and I think his cousin or his brother owns a business opposite my parents, and he's also very lovely. So I kind of had a connection to him already, and yet I went into the shop and asked, like, I hadn't seen him for a while, and I asked like where he was and how he was, and they were like, oh yeah, he's kind of shielding, but you can go and just like, they told me where he lived and they told me to just go and like knock on his door, which I did, brought them some rugelach, and
the way to everyone's heart.
And kind of interviewed him and for a while, and actually, so his wife answered the door initially, and he wasn't in, and she was like, come back in half an hour, go and do something crazy and come back. And she was like this like very jolly American. She was born in the States, and she was also like, she kind of came into the interview because she was like overhearing me ask. She was like, what are you doing this for? Like, why are you asking all these questions? And then I was talking to her about the music, and she was like, oh yeah, that's kind of old shtetl music. So she knew of it, and she was like, well, I know what it is because I was born in America. So they kind of relate to it in a slightly different way to the British Hasidim, it seems. Like she knew of the concept of klezmer, but felt like it was like, oh yeah, it's old shtetl music. But like you were saying, like Francesca, like they know the music. Once they hear it, they're like, oh yeah, of course, that's this tune or whatever. But yeah, they wouldn't call it or conceive of it in the same way that we have as a kind of secular tradition. It's much more embedded. I
suppose in some ways that also, the idea of sounding out the kind of almost the psychogeography of a play is that links to the Take Stock Exchange project that you've been doing as well. It links to a lot of the work that we've been doing. We run a songwriting group at the museum and set quite a lot of the oral history stories to use those as inspiration. But there is something about, I'm really interested in how it's an area sounded. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the Take Stock Exchange project? I think it's really fascinating use of klezmer.
So it's a project with two storytellers, Nick Kassenbach and Ollie Hawes, and the company is called Take Stock Exchange, and then they run this project called You, Me, the World, and so each cycle of the project, you visit like a specific area. You either like an area of a borough or like try and encompass a whole borough. So we've worked in like Ilford and the City of London and where else? Hackney Wick. And currently we're running a project in Poplar, and it kind of has 3 stages. So the first stage is that Nick and Ollie, the storytellers, run workshops they try and meet as many different community groups as possible who are active in the area. So from like, they go to schools, but they also go to like old people's homes and like knitting groups and bingo halls and gardening groups and like English as foreign language lesson groups and like basically anyone they can get their hands on.
They have way good a time with this quiz.
So yeah, it's really fun. So they run a workshop to kind of collect stories. They ask them some specific questions, and collect stories from each of these groups. And then the second stage is where I come in. So they tell me kind of what happened at each of the groups and tell me the stories that they're going to tell from each of the groups. And then I kind of either write a theme or like use some existing material to kind of, I guess, sound that group or the story. And then we go back to each of the groups and they're retold a story from their group, and then they also hear stories from other groups from around the area. And then there's a third stage where we kind of knit it all together into a live show. So they're kind of 3 core pillars. Their values are connection, empathy, and empowerment, and creating a dialogue through difference. So the idea is that people are kind of heard and hear each other, I guess. And what's really interesting through the process of putting the show together is to kind of tease out what the kind of collective consciousness of the area is. And like very often there's a very clear theme running through everything. Something that comes through in each of the groups has a link to others, and most recently it's been very much like gentrification. That's the kind of, that seems to be the collective consciousness of the whole city, really. But something that I'm always really struck by is how powerful it seems for people to feel heard, and like to feel like their story has been like heard and held and valued. And I think the function of the music is that sense of like someone's really like taken this on and like held it in a particular way and like placed more value on it than, not like monetary value, but like I'm
just thinking about that in terms of the way historically, especially in the West, emphasis has always been on the artist and the genius, you know, and like how it's like the artist came up with all this stuff and presented it to the world and they're a genius. But what's happening now, I think, with an emphasis on empathy, and I have to say it's definitely this is definitely a gendered discussion and a gendered experience, I think, but it does seem like those kinds of barriers are being sort of demystified and broken down. And because in practice, like, creation is not one, it's not one person making something, it's all these things feeding in. And when you're doing something like oral history projects or kind of research with in these kind of detailed and very specialized sort of nuanced ways, it seems to change the perspective of the onlooker, like the person who's going to experience the project. Like, it would change for someone like me as an outsider. Let's just say I'm an outsider. I'll just come along and experience what you're creating. It puts me into that person's experience, and you're essentially facilitating that like journey into their world, which is so different to kind of standing up and being like, I made this thing and these people, they just happen to be there on the side, but it's not really important. And it's just really nice to hear that.
Honesty is the key. Seriously, you can say, I'm doing this music, I'm doing my music, I'm doing anything, everything. We can do anything we like. We're creators. As long as we don't call ourselves traditionalists, as long as we don't, I don't say I'm a traditional Yiddish singer, I can do anything I like. It's just about honesty. That's all.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to kind of what I was saying about sort of like positions of power when you're on stage in some way, and particularly when you're then engaging with like cultures which are not the dominant culture. We have to be very careful to be honest and to be open about the process and kind of respect the power that we're given by our audiences to be exploring these things.